Nogaret was sent to the gallows shortly after he was knighted. The king publicly declared that Nogaret was guilty of treason and murder. According to the law, Nogaret had the right to speak his last words. Nogaret vehemently defended himself, insisting that everything he did was for the sake of the nation. Although he admitted to killing, he denied any act of treason. The king, however, saw this as mere excuses. Since Nogaret could not prove his innocence, the execution had to proceed. Then the king signaled to the soldiers, and Nogaret was sent to the gallows. With the noose tightening around his neck, the soldiers pulled up the rope, and Nogaret's breathing became increasingly difficult. Just then, the unexpected happened. Nogaret's uncle, Navarre, had prepared in advance. After dealing with the executioner soldiers, he fled with Nogaret. King Philip could only watch from a distance, angrily shouting Nogaret's name. Meanwhile, Landry, accompanied by Gawain, was searching for the Holy Grail. Following a clue, they learned that the Grail might be at the monastery where Landry first met Godfrey. However, upon their arrival, they found the monastery reduced to ruins. An old woman at the scene explained that a child playing with fire had caused the building to burn down. Landry was filled with self-blame. He was tortured for this clue and implicated Tancred, but the result was a wasteland. At that moment, Landry felt utterly hopeless and decided to give up the search for the Grail. Gawain returned to the streets to distribute bread to the poor. Among those who came to receive it was a beggar dressed in coarse cloth. It was Nogaret. After escaping the gallows, he had not left Paris. He hoped to obtain information about the Holy Grail from Gawain. Now, Nogaret too had joined the quest for the Grail. Gawain informed Nogaret that Landry had abandoned the search for the Grail. However, Nogaret did not believe him. Landry sought an audience with the Pope, confessing his interactions with the Brotherhood of Light and the exchange of Tancred for information about the Grail. The Pope consoled Landry, advising him to take his time in the search. Landry also mentioned that the Brotherhood of Light was protecting the Grail. Upon hearing this, the Pope became displeased and emphasized that the Grail belonged to Christians alone, and heretics should never lay hands on it. The Pope then expressed relief that Landry had not found the Grail and warned him against further contact with the Brotherhood. Landry tried to explain, but the Pope, unwilling to listen further, dismissed him. Queen Joan's pregnancy became increasingly evident, forcing her to inform King Philip. Although Landry was unhappy that his child would recognize another man as his father, he could do nothing about it. The king mentioned that the royal physician had said the queen was carrying a prince and even had Landry touch the queen's belly, which made Landry feel even worse. At that moment, the king received news that Catalonia had invaded Navarre. The queen, upon hearing this, became restless, as Navarre was her territory. The king stated that it would take 2 weeks to gather the troops, but the queen could not wait. She wanted to leave for Navarre immediately to save her people. The two argued, and the king even ordered the guards to escort the queen back to her chambers to calm down. However, the queen would not sit idly by. That night, she left for Navarre with her maidservant. At a meeting of the Knights Templar, Landry learned that the queen had defied the king's orders and gone to Navarre alone. This news consumed his attention, causing him to overlook another piece of information. Roland was the murderer of Godfrey. Roland was to be extradited to Genoa for trial, as he had also committed murder there. Landry rushed to the palace to help the king bring the queen back, but the king refused. He assured Landry that arrangements had been made in Navarre to ensure the queen's safety. King Philip, who was disobeyed by the queen, wanted to leave the palace incognito and have a drink to relax. He changed into commoner's clothes and insisted that Landry accompany him to drink freely. As a Templar knight, Landry was forbidden to drink in public, and as the commander, he especially could not break the rules. But the king asked him to drink, and he couldn't refuse, so he had to drink it all in one gulp. After drinking, King Philip confided in Landry, complaining that the queen called him a coward and said he had never been to battle, unlike the Templar knights who fought on the front lines. Just as they were talking, the king was bumped into by a passerby. Landry tried to calm the king down, but the king, wanting to prove his manhood, challenged the man to a fight. A fistfight ensued in the tavern, with Landry coaching the king. This was the king's first time fighting as a commoner, and his opponent, unaware of his true identity, showed no mercy. As they were celebrating their victory, they were suddenly ambushed. Landry fought back against the attackers. On the way back to the palace, the king complained to Landry about Nogaret's betrayal, which had deeply hurt him. He felt that the most painful thing was being betrayed by someone he trusted. and now he believed that only Landry was a true friend. Landry, however, did not respond. In the Templar dungeon, Parsifal was torturing Roland to find out who was behind the plot. Draper intervened and mentioned that Roland was to be sent to Genoa for trial. Parsifal questioned this decision, believing that nothing was more serious than the murder of the Templar commander and that Roland must have accomplices. He showed Draper a note with the message, "I am in Paris, need more people." Draper, however, was unconcerned and only wanted to close the case quickly, accusing Parsifal of seeking personal revenge. Unable to convince Draper, Parsifal decided to take matters into his own hands. He retrieved a necklace left by his fiancée and, the next day, disguised himself as a carriage driver from Genoa to take Roland to a secluded forest. Roland, upon seeing Parsifal remove his helmet, was not surprised, as if he knew his fate was sealed. Landry made a mistake and told Gawain that he had an affair with a married woman and that she was pregnant with his child. However, he did not expect that Gawain would tell Nogaret about it. Nogaret was not surprised to hear the news, but tried to sow discord between Landry and Gawain. He said that even if Landry found the Holy Grail, he would not use it to heal Gawain's leg injury. Gawain didn't believe it at first, thinking that he became like this because of Landry, and Landry would definitely help him. However, Landry confirmed Nogaret's words, stating that the Grail was not meant for healing Gawain and that enduring pain was God's will. Gawain was speechless and could only pray alone before the cross. He could not understand why Landry, who had broken so many rules, was still considered righteous, while he, despite his devotion, had to endure physical suffering. Suddenly, he decided to seize the Grail, believing it to be God's will. In the forest by the river, Parsifal tied Roland to a tree. He kissed the ring left by his fiancée and threw it into the lake. Parsifal interrogated Roland about who had sent him, but Roland showed no fear. Parsifal then struck Roland in the stomach with an axe, causing Roland to panic and mutter something. Parsifal seemed to understand something after hearing this. He walked to the river, picked up the axe and walked towards Roland again. Roland kept praying, and Parsifal smiled and told Roland that everything was over. The next day, led by the old woman, Landry and Gawain continued their search for the Grail. They arrived at a monastery where Landry met the abbot who had cared for him as a child. The abbot now had only one arm, the other having been cruelly severed by Malraux. The old woman opened a door, and Landry and Gawain entered a tunnel. After some effort, they discovered a tree with a box hanging from it. Landry took down the box and opened it, revealing the Grail inside. This small cup had caused countless deaths. Gawain confirmed it was the Grail and then drew a short sword from behind his back. Landry had been on guard but did not expect Gawain to act so quickly. Initially, when the old woman warned that Gawain would try to seize the Grail, Landry did not believe her. However, Gawain's actions now confirmed her words. Landry thought Gawain would wait until they returned to the city to make his move, but he underestimated Gawain's impatience. The two fought, with Landry attacking Gawain's weak points, tripping him and knocking him to the ground. Gawain, enraged, fought back. But Landry soon had his sword at Gawain's chest. Landry did not kill Gawain but instead knocked him unconscious. As Nogaret wandered the streets, he overheard people talking about France going to war. Upon inquiring, he learned it was not with England but because Catalonia had invaded Navarre, and even the pregnant queen had gone to Navarre. The passerby's words reminded Nogaret of what Gawain said. He once said that Landry had a child with a married woman. At this moment, Nogaret seemed to understand something. The old woman asked what had happened to Gawain, and Landry explained that he had knocked him out and would release him when he woke up. Landry intended to deliver the Grail to the Pope. The old woman strongly objected, insisting that giving the Grail to the Pope would mean certain death. Landry, however, did not believe her. The old woman then revealed that she was Landry's biological mother. Landry looked at her, knowing she spoke the truth, and was momentarily speechless. Parsifal returned to the sanctuary and told Pierre about killing Roland and discovering the mastermind behind him. He then stated that he trusted no one and wanted to inform the commander immediately. At that moment, Pierre attacked him, and Parsifal paid the price for his trust. The Knights Templar and the Papal Guard have engaged in a rare confrontation. The Templars, outnumbered, are forced to retreat first due to the Papal Guard's numerical advantage. The catalyst for this conflict is none other than the Holy Grail. After retrieving the Holy Grail, Landry is determined to hand it over to the Pope, as the grail is a sacred artifact of Christianity. If the Pope regains the grail, he could launch another crusade. Back at the sanctuary, Pierre came to report that Parsifal had kidnapped the suspect Roland in disguise, and he also confessed that he knew about it but did not report it. In reality, Parsifal has been killed by Pierre, and his body disposed of in Godfrey's sarcophagus. Fortunately, Parsifal had previously contacted Draper of the Knights and mentioned Roland's letter for help. Although he didn't know who was behind Roland, he got a key piece of information, which was Roland's code name. Landry decides to send everyone to search for Parsifal and the letter in the vast Saint Germain forest. Pierre, watching the knights leave, nods to someone in the crowd, indicating that everything is going according to plan. With the Holy Grail found, Rashid arrives, his mission also being to protect the Grail. Landry insists on giving the Grail to the Pope and is willing to face the consequences. Despite his mother's and Rashid's attempts to dissuade him, Landry trusts no one. The Pope arrives at the sanctuary with a large entourage, excited about the reappearance of the Holy Grail. Looking at the playing cup in Landry's hand, the Pope was impressed by its simplicity. Landry offers to escort the Pope and the Grail to Rome, but the Pope declines, stating he has enough protection. Landry inquires about the Pope's plans with the Grail, and the Pope reveals his intention to launch another crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. Landry hesitates, not wanting more bloodshed, but the Pope accuses him of being influenced by infidels. As the Pope's guards leave, Landry notices something amiss. He sees that the guards have numbered tags on their collars and recalls Draper mentioning 4. Realizing Roland is a papal guard, Landry deduces that the Pope is behind Godfrey's murder. Since all the knights had been sent out to look for Parsifal, there was a serious shortage of people in the sanctuary. Landry confronts the Pope, revealing his knowledge of Roland's identity. The Pope admits to killing Godfrey for refusing to hand over the Grail to the Church. His true plan is to use the Grail to instigate wars in Europe and restore the Church's former glory and power. A fight ensues, but despite their numbers, the papal guards are no match for the Templars. Landry rushes to the gate to have Pierre close it, but Pierre, a spy for the Pope, lets the Pope escape and locks Landry and the others inside. Queen Joan has been thinking about how to respond since she returned to her domain. While she was worrying about the affairs of the country, the governor of Navarre came to invite her to attend a war meeting. Knowing that only the highest commanders are qualified to convene a war conference, the governor's move was a step beyond his rank, and Queen Joan was a bit angry. However, what infuriated her even more was that Navarre had surrendered, and the Queen of Catalonia was already seated on the throne. The governor wanted to take the Queen back to Paris, but the Queen of Catalonia refused. She stated that while others could leave, Queen Joan must stay, as they were relatives. Meanwhile, in the French palace, de Nogaret risked his life to approach King Philip. He informed the king that the Holy Grail was in France and that it had the power to overthrow the king's rule. There is an army of paladins in the lands of France, not under the authority of the king. These men are well equipped and trained, and these men are ruled only by the Pope. De Nogaret states that he has raised an army of Red Knights who are capable of fighting the Templars. However, King Philip saw no need to make enemies of the Templars, considering himself a close friend of Landry. De Nogaret countered, claiming that Landry was not the king's friend but rather the queen's intimate companion, even suggesting that the queen's unborn child was Landry's. Enraged, King Philip grabbed de Nogaret by the throat but ultimately restrained himself. He decided to imprison de Nogaret until the queen's return for further questioning. After calming down, King Philip sent a box of gold and silver to de Nogaret's room. Even though he was not completely sure about what de Nogaret said, just in case, this box of gold and silver was the payment to the Red Knight. The Queen of Catalonia, seeking vengeance for Prince Louis's death, demanded that Queen Joan choose between her unborn child and her daughter Isabella in Paris. Faced with this cruel choice, Joan was forced to offer Isabella. However, Joan later appealed to their familial bond, reminding the Queen of Catalonia that the child she carried was also her blood relative. The Queen of Catalonia was moved as she felt the baby's movements and realized that her behavior was cruel and selfish. Just when she let down her guard, Joan took the opportunity to stab her to death. With the Queen of Catalonia dead, Joan took her place, becoming the new ruler of Catalonia and Navarre. Landry and the others are trapped inside the house, and with Pierre outside directing people to bang on the door, it's only a matter of time before the door is broken down. The defenders grabbed what few weapons they had and prepared to fight. When the enemy rushed in, Landry's mother joined in the fight. The paladin blocked the door with a bench. Landry's mother also constantly reached the lives of her enemies. It's just that in this frontal combat scenario, the scimitar attack has little range. After Rashid takes out an enemy, he is stabbed by the enemy with his short sword, luckily not to the internal organs. Draper cauterized the wound with a hot iron, but it was only a temporary fix. Rashid has no time to rest, as outside the enemy pours a toxic powder through the fireplace. Landry decides to break out and Rashid joins in, leading the charge. Despite his severe injuries and the overwhelming number of enemies, Rashid fought valiantly but ultimately fell. Landry headed straight for Pierre, who proved to be a formidable opponent. Their sword fight turned into a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. Just as neither seemed to gain the upper hand, an arrow struck Pierre in the thigh. Seizing the moment, Landry finished him off. Before Rashid died, he called Landry to his side and asked him to put a bracelet in his son's grave. He apologized to Landry and said that it was his plan to make Landry think someone was dead. Then Rashid died. Landry is puzzled by this statement that Rashid made when a masked man in black comes to him. He took off his veil and it turned out to be Tancred. It turned out that the person Rashid was talking about was Tancred.